Right, so you saw that flash up briefly. Please wait while SQL Server 2017 finishes the current operation. Now let's have a look at what we've got here. And there's no big click here button. We don't really know where to go. Well, where to go is on this left hand side. We've got planning, installation, maintenance and so forth. We have a look at installation. And then we have new SQL Server standalone installation or add features to an existing installation. So that is the equivalent of the big green red button that we're looking for. So it does at least have a little bit of green there. So SQL Server 2017, we can say we want a free edition, the evaluation, the developer or the express, or we have to enter a product key for the standard or the enterprise edition. It used to be, when we're talking about SQL Server 2014 especially, that you had to enter a product key for the developer, but that's no longer. You can see developer edition does not have an expiration date like the 180 trial period, has the same set of features as in evaluation, so that's the hugely expensive version, but is licensed for non-production database application development only. In other words, your own testing. So click next. So I agree to all of these license rules. It is worth reading, just so you can tick and say, yes, I've definitely done it. There's a rule check in progress. There's only about 6 or so rules that it's going to check. As you can see, we're going down all of this. So everything has passed. There's a warning about the Windows firewall, but I can ignore that. Click next. And this is the major thing. Feature selection. What features do I want to install? And I want a lot of the features, but not all of the features. So let's see what we want to do. First of all, database engine services. So this provides controlled access and rapid transaction processing. So basically, this provides the base unit for, this is really the SQL Server. SQL Server replication, that's only if you have a computer with SQL Server in one location and another one in a separate location. So not very likely to begin with. Machine learning services using R and Python, only install those if you've actually got and a use for R and Python, which we don't. Full text and semantic extractions for search, that is actually can be quite useful. So I'm going to take that. It's not essential, but it's fairly useful. Data quality services, optional. I'm not going to install it. I'm not going to install Polybase. Now, if you do want to use SSAS, analytical services, then click that. If you don't want to use SSAS at this stage anyway, then you don't need to check it. Looking at the shared features, again, I don't want R and Python. Data quality client is optional. Client tools connectivity is useful sometimes, just so you can see if you've got a problem between one computer and another. Integration services. So if you are planning to use SSIS, then that's useful, but you don't need the scale out or scale out master or scale out worker. Client tools backwards compatibility. If you're not going backwards to 2012, then you don't need that. If you do, then feel free to check. And the SDK is only useful if you're using programming. Distributed replay, again, it's if you have one computer in one location and another computer in another location, they can distribute the load. So in other words, they can share all of the processing. Again, SDK, that's useful if you're using programming. And master database services, that it has some fairly specialist tools. So you can see all that I've selected, this is a must. Database engine services, that is your actual SQL Server if you're using SSMS later on. Full text can be useful, analytical services if you're using SSAS, and integration services if you're using SSIS. And personally, I install client tools connectivity and text searching. So if I click next, and you'll see as soon as I click on each things like analysis services, a new item gets added to the list. So I'll click next. And we go into feature rules. So it's just checking that you can actually install everything. Now there are two types of instances. I can either have a default instance, which would be called, in this case, MS SQL Server, or I can name it. So it's entirely down to you. So I'm going to have what should I have? A default instance or named instance? I'm going to have a named instance. I'm going to call this, well, I could call this SQL Server 2017, for example, but I think actually I'll just have a default instance. That's usually only a consideration if you've got more than one version of SQL Server installed. Next, we'll go to the server configuration. So this is where all of your passwords can be entered, but we'll let the computer deal with that. Collation, this will probably be your default. So if you set your computer up as a French computer, it will probably say French here. So you probably don't need to change anything in either service accounts or collation. So we'll just click next. Database engine configuration. There are two types of authentication, Windows authentication or mixed mode. I generally go, at this stage anyway, for Windows authentication mode. Specify SQL Server administrators. As this is my personal database, and it's probably your personal database, I'm going to add the current user. So click on that, and there's me. So I don't think I've got to do anything else. Data directories get set up. TempDB, this is a temporary database, again gets set up, and file stream not enabled at this stage. I can enable it later if I want to. So click next. SSAS, so if you're going to be playing with SSAS, then you'll need to know whether you want the multidimensional mode or the tabular mode. So choose whichever one you want. I'm going to stick to the tabular mode on here, and I'm going to again add me as a current user. So it depends if you are following it. Actually, I'm going to go for multidimensional in this particular instance. It depends if you've got following a course which is about MDX or following a course which is about tabular. So click next, and there we are. It's going to tell you what it's going to install. So something's already installed, and if you didn't have these things, the computer would install it for you. So we'll click install, and basically you can now leave it alone for the next 10 minutes. Now, while it is installing, I just want to talk at this stage about various different editions. So far we've talked about one type of edition. We talked about, are you getting the Express, the Developer, the Standard, or the Enterprise? But then there's a year edition. So for instance, SQL Server 2012 came with a lot new functionality that actually changed how you can code. It was quite an improvement. Following that, there's a lot of background changes and a lot of advanced changes. But for the newcomer to SQL Server, there hasn't been that many changes, to be honest, except in how you actually install it. This seems to change every 2 years. So this is probably the third or fourth time I've had to re-record this particular installation, but the end result is virtually identical. So we've got SQL Server 2012. Now there is an exam which is 461 exam called Querying Microsoft SQL Server 2012, which later then became Querying Microsoft Server 2012/2014. However, I just want to say that you can use SQL Server 2012, 2014, 2016, or 2017. They will give you all the same functionalities that you need if you're following this exam. If you're doing another exam,